I'm the kind of person who keeps old receipts in a folder because you never know. I've never been proud of that, but I've always believed it was the safer way to live. I'm 48. I manage IT procurement for a mid-sized insurance company in St. Louis, and I've built my whole adult personality around being steady. No surprises, no big swings, no get-rich-quick anything. My wife, Claire, calls it my internal spreadsheet. She means it as a joke, but it's not wrong. We've been married 19 years. 2 kids, one in college, one a high school senior, and a mortgage we refinanced at the right time. We're fine. Not comfortable the way people online pretend to be, but fine. Except fine has started to mean one missed paycheck away from panic, more than I like to admit. So when I saw an antique computer listed on a neighborhood estate sale page, an IBM PS/2 with the original monitor, I bought it without thinking too hard. It was nostalgia more than anything. My first job involved machines like that. I told Claire it was a harmless midlife indulgence. $200, I said. Cheaper than a motorcycle. She rolled her eyes but didn't object. She rarely objects to anything that seems small. That computer was the first thing I'd brought into my house in a long time that didn't feel like it was meant to solve a problem. It was just a thing, a relic, a piece of a simpler era. I didn't know it was also a container. The estate sale was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The kind of place where lawns are trimmed like they're competing and the mailboxes match. A man in his 60s ran it with the blank friendliness of someone performing a duty. My uncle, he told me when I asked. He was particular. The computer was in the basement, on a folding table, surrounded by boxes of cables and dusty binders labeled with neat handwriting. The man said the uncle had been an investor. He said it with a slight shrug, like he wasn't sure what it meant. I checked the machine over, mostly for completeness. Case intact, ports clean. It felt heavier than I expected, but old computers were heavy, so I didn't question it. I handed over cash. He didn't even count it in front of me, just slid it into an envelope. On the way home, I felt that mild, guilty satisfaction you get from buying something frivolous while pretending it's practical. When I carried it into my garage, Claire called from the kitchen. That thing better not live in the dining room. It's going in my office, I said. I'm not an animal. She laughed. You're an animal with spreadsheets. That night, after dinner, I cleared a corner of my desk and started setting it up. I wanted to hear it boot. I wanted to see that old text crawl up the screen. A tiny, harmless time machine. I didn't notice the faint seam along the bottom panel until I was wiping dust off the case with a rag and my thumb caught on an edge. At first I thought it was a missing screw or a warped piece of plastic. I crouched and looked closer. There was a panel that didn't match the rest of the case. Not a standard access door, something that had been cut and fitted by hand. I should have stopped right there, called the estate sale guy, put it back in the car, returned it. That would have been the responsible version of this story. Instead, I went to the garage, grabbed a small flathead screwdriver, and pried gently at the seam. The panel popped free with a quiet snap. Inside, where there should have been empty space and wiring, was a leather briefcase wedged into the hollow like someone had built the computer around it. It was narrow enough to fit, but only barely. The leather was worn at the edges and had a brass clasp that looked expensive even under a layer of dust. My first thought was that it was a joke, some kind of gimmick, a hidden compartment for valuables. My second thought was that I just stumbled into something I wasn't meant to find. My hands were sweating as I worked the case out. It was heavier than the computer itself. I brought it upstairs and set it on the dining room table before I even realized what I was doing. Claire walked in with a dish towel in her hands and stopped. "What is that?" she asked. "I found it inside the computer," I said. She blinked. "Inside? I think it was hidden," I said, and I heard the faint excitement in my own voice and hated myself for it. Claire put the dish towel down slowly, like sudden movements might set something off. "Open it," she said. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds. Then I flipped the clasps. The briefcase opened with a soft sigh, and the smell of old leather and paper hit me. Inside were envelopes, a couple of thick binders, and 3 velvet pouches that clinked when I touched them. There was also a thin manila folder with a label written in that same neat handwriting. For emergencies only. Claire's hand went to her mouth. I didn't speak for a long time because my brain was trying to decide which kind of emergency this was. The velvet pouches held gold coins. Not costume coins, real ones, stamped with dates and weights. I didn't know much about bullion, but I knew enough to feel my pulse spike. The envelopes were labeled with companies, some names I recognized, some I didn't, and inside were stock certificates. Actual paper certificates with embossed seals, like something from a movie. There was also a stack of cashier's checks, all made out to the same name, Harold R. Klein. The binders were worse. Ledger pages with handwritten entries, dates, amounts, notes like sell after earnings and avoid paper trail. It wasn't just old investment documentation. It was the diary of someone who treated money like a secret language. Claire whispered, "How much is all this worth?" "I don't know," I said. My voice came out calm, but my hands were shaking. I kept flipping pages until I found something that made my stomach drop. A safe deposit box key taped to an index card. The card had an address for a bank branch and a box number written under it. Then, tucked behind the key, a single sheet of paper with a list of account numbers and, this part felt unreal, an amount written at the bottom. Total held, 1.3 m. Claire sat down hard in a dining chair. I read it again, slower. 1.3 million. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't cash in hand. But it was a number large enough to change the texture of our lives. It was a number that made my brain instantly start solving problems. Tuition, mortgage, retirement, the nagging medical bill from Claire's surgery last year that we'd been paying down in monthly chunks we pretended didn't hurt. Claire stared at me, eyes glassy. "This isn't ours," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "No," I said quickly, "it's not ours." And then I did something that would haunt me later. I closed the briefcase and said, "Let's just put it away tonight. We'll think tomorrow." I wasn't buying time to do the right thing. I was buying time to let the idea of keeping it settle into the room. I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same thought like a dog worrying a bone. Someone hid this for a reason. Maybe they're dead. Maybe no one knows. Maybe it's been sitting there for years, waiting for the person who happened to buy the computer. I made coffee at 5 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table staring at the closed briefcase like it was a live animal. Claire came down an hour later wearing my sweatshirt, hair messy, face drawn. "We have to tell someone," she said. "I know." I lied. Because knowing and doing are different things. We talked in circles. Police, lawyer, bank, the estate sale guy. Each option carried its own set of risks and shame. Reporting it could mean losing it. Keeping it could mean committing a crime. Returning it could mean handing over something that could fix our lives with one decision. "Around noon," Claire said quietly. "Do you know what this would mean for the kids?" I did. That was the problem. I pictured our daughter, Leah, graduating without loans. Our son, Mark, not having to pick a cheaper school because of our limitations. I pictured myself not waking up at 3 a.m., calculating how long we could survive if my job got cut. "I'm going to call an attorney," I said, and that was the responsible choice, the one that let me breathe again. We met with a local lawyer that afternoon. He was careful, skeptical, and immediately asked where we got it. When I told him, he raised his eyebrows and said, "You need to assume this is not abandoned property. It's likely concealed assets." He advised us to contact the estate executor first. Document everything. Do not attempt to cash or transfer anything, especially not the stock certificates or checks. Claire asked about a finder's fee. The lawyer didn't smile. "That's not really how it works," he said. On the drive home, Claire was silent. Then she said, "So we do everything right, and we get nothing." "That's not what he said," I replied, but it was close enough to feel true. That night, I did the first truly questionable thing. I took photos of everything in the briefcase and saved them to a folder on my laptop labeled Tax Docs. I told myself it was for documentation. It was also for leverage. The estate sale guy answered on the third call. When I said I'd found something hidden in the computer, his tone shifted, subtle, but immediate. What kind of something? He asked. A briefcase, I said carefully. With documents. A key. Silence on the line. Then, my uncle had a safe deposit box. You knew about it, I said. I knew he had one, he said quickly. I didn't know. Listen, can you bring it back? We can sort it out. His sudden urgency made my skin prickle. I want to do this through proper channels, I said. I'm speaking with an attorney. His voice hardened. That's unnecessary. This belongs to the estate. Maybe, I said, but I found it inside property I purchased. It's not simple. He exhaled sharply. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. When I hung up, Claire said, He knew. I think so, I replied. That was twist one in a new direction. This wasn't forgotten treasure. Someone had been waiting for it, or at least feared it resurfacing. That evening, a man showed up at our front door. Late 40s, clean haircut, polo shirt tucked in like he was visiting a client. He held a business card in one hand and smiled like we were neighbors. I'm Brian, he said. Harold Klein's nephew. Claire's face went pale. Brian glanced past me into the house, eyes quick. I heard you might have found something that belongs to the family. I'm not discussing anything on my porch, I said. His smile stayed in place but cooled. I'd really prefer we keep this informal, he said. Lawyers make everyone lose money. I shut the door, and for the first time, the briefcase stopped feeling like a blessing and started feeling like a threat. The next day, I filed a report with the police, not about the money exactly, but about the unannounced visitor. The officer listened politely, took notes, and offered the kind of non-committal reassurance people offer when they can't actually protect you. Brian didn't stop. He called my phone. He left voicemails. He emailed my work address. How he got that, I still don't know. Saying we can resolve this quietly. Claire started jumping at every car that slowed near the house. She kept the blinds tilted just so. We had one of those marriages where fear turns into irritability because you don't want to admit you're scared. I told our lawyer about Brian. The lawyer told me to stop engaging and let him handle communications. He also asked a question that made my stomach drop. Have you verified Harold Klein is deceased? I realized I hadn't. I'd assumed because estate sale, because nephew, because neat narratives. I looked it up. Harold R. Klein had died 8 months earlier. There was an obituary. There was also a note in a local business journal about Klein Capital Partners dissolving after regulatory issues. Regulatory issues. Those words stick in your throat when you work in compliance. I felt cold. If this was connected to fraud, we weren't just holding someone's hidden savings. We were holding evidence. Or proceeds. Or both. Claire said, so we give it back and hope we're not dragged into it? Or we keep it and guarantee we are? I said. That night, when Claire went to bed, I opened my laptop and searched for the stock certificate numbers. Some were still valid. Some had been canceled and replaced electronically years ago. The gold coins were real. The cashier's checks were old but not expired. I didn't tell Claire what I found. Instead, I printed one certificate, just one, on my office printer at work the next day after hours. Copy, not the original. I wanted to see if it would verify at a brokerage. That was my second questionable choice. I started testing the edges of legality because the money had begun to feel like an exam I could pass if I was careful enough. A week later, our lawyer sent a letter to Brian stating the items were secured and that any claims would be addressed through probate and law enforcement as appropriate. Brian responded through his own attorney almost immediately. The response wasn't just a claim. It was a threat. They accused us of theft, implied criminal charges, demanded return within 48 hours, and referenced federal interest. Claire read it twice and then said, voice thin, they're going to ruin us. They can try, I said, but I didn't believe it. I'd spent my life obeying rules and still found myself standing on a cliff. Then came twist two. Claire confessed something I didn't know. We were sitting at the kitchen table in that exhausted gray hour after dinner. She said, "I need you to not freak out. That phrase always means you should freak out." She slid a folder toward me. Inside were credit card statements. Not ours, the ones I knew about, but 2 cards in her name with balances that made my vision blur. $18,000 on one, $27,000 on the other. "What is this?" I asked. Claire stared at her hands. "After my surgery," she said, "when I was out of work, I kept thinking we'd catch up. Then Mark's braces. Then Leah's dorm stuff. I didn't want you to worry." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, shame before anger, because the first thing I felt was humiliation that I didn't know. The responsible husband who tracks receipts didn't know his own household debt. "You hid this," I said. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. That sentence landed like a brick. Financial manipulation disguised as care. I'd seen it in other people's lives, judged it, told myself it wouldn't happen in mine. And now the briefcase wasn't just a tempting windfall. It was a solution to a secret I'd never agreed to carry. Claire looked up, eyes wet. "If we give it back," she said, "we drown." There it was. Money turning choices into ultimatums. The false resolution arrived in a neat package. Our lawyer negotiated a meeting with Brian's attorney at the bank branch listed on the safe deposit key. The idea was to open the box under supervision, inventory everything, and hand it to the executor with documentation so we couldn't be accused of stealing. Sounded clean. It sounded like the responsible path. It sounded like relief. Claire and I walked into the bank like we were going to our own sentencing. Brian was there, too, in a suit this time, face tight with forced patience. His attorney spoke in a calm voice about restoring rightful property. When the bank manager opened the safe deposit box, my stomach dropped all over again. Inside was cash, bundled and rubber-banded in stacks, along with more certificates, a few passports in Harold's name with different photos, and a thin black notebook. The manager stared. Brian's attorney stopped talking. This wasn't just hidden savings. This was a second life. The cash alone looked like hundreds of thousands. The notebook had account logins and notes that read like instructions: move after subpoena, use cousin's name, don't trust Brian. I watched Brian's face as he saw that last line. His jaw clenched hard enough to show muscle. For a brief moment, I felt vindicated. Harold didn't trust him. Maybe we weren't the villains here. Then Brian did something that made my blood run cold. He smiled, just slightly, and said, "Well, this simplifies things." I realized he wasn't shocked by the passports. He wasn't concerned by the cash. He was relieved. That recontextualized his urgency. He wasn't trying to preserve his uncle's legacy. He was trying to recover whatever Harold had kept from him. After the inventory was recorded, the bank manager insisted everything remain sealed and transferred to the executor under legal hold. Brian's attorney protested. The manager stood firm. We left without touching anything. In the parking lot, Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "It's over," she said. I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost said yes. That was the false resolution. We'd done it right, so surely the crisis was behind us. It wasn't. 2 days later, an IRS agent and a man from the SEC knocked on my door. They were polite. They were also very sure of themselves. They asked about the computer, the briefcase, the box. They asked if I'd moved anything. They asked if I'd taken photos. They asked if I knew Harold Klein personally. I answered carefully, as truthfully as I could without confessing how deep my curiosity had already gone. Then the SEC guy said, "We're aware of communications suggesting you intended to liquidate assets." My throat tightened. What communications? He slid a printout across my coffee table. It was an email from my work account to a brokerage customer service address, asking about verifying a certificate number. My stomach flipped. I thought that email was harmless. I thought it was invisible. It wasn't. I felt my face heat with shame. Not because I'd been caught committing a crime I hadn't cashed anything, but because I'd been caught wanting to. The agent asked, "Do you have any copies of documents?" I looked at Claire. Her eyes were wide and terrified. I said, "No, and hated myself as I said it. After they left, Claire whispered, "You lied." "I protected us," I snapped, and the words came out harsher than I intended. She flinched. "That's what I said," she whispered back. The briefcase had turned us into mirrors of each other. We were both hiding money problems. We were both justifying dishonesty as protection. That night, I deleted the folder of photos from my laptop. Then I emptied the recycle bin. Then I lay in bed listening to Claire breathe and wondered if any of it mattered anymore. Brian's behavior changed after the agents visited. He stopped calling. His attorney stopped threatening. Instead, we received a formal notice that Brian was contesting the probate process, claiming the assets in the safe deposit box were personal effects bequeathed to him directly. It was a legal maneuver, and it meant months, maybe years, of court. Meanwhile, rumors spread. Our neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, asked Claire at the mailbox if everything was okay because she'd seen government people at our house. Mark's friend's dad made a joke about finding pirate treasure. Leah texted from campus asking why Aunt Denise said we were in some kind of trouble. Money doesn't stay quiet. It makes noise even when you try to muffle it. Claire's anxiety turned into anger. She blamed Brian. She blamed Harold. Then, more quietly, she blamed me for insisting we do everything through lawyers. "If we'd just taken some cash," she said one night, "we could have paid off the cards. It wouldn't have mattered." "That's insane," I said. She laughed without humor. "Is it? You've already lied to federal agents." I wanted to deny it. Couldn't. Then Twist 3 arrived via a certified letter. My employer had been contacted. "Inquiry regarding potential involvement in financial misconduct," it said, in the cold language of risk assessment. I was placed on administrative leave pending review. Compliance officer under investigation. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Our income dropped immediately. Our fine life became precarious in a week. And suddenly, Claire's hidden debt wasn't an embarrassing secret. It was a weight around our necks. When you're scared, your brain starts bargaining. I told myself that if Brian was corrupt, if Harold was a criminal, then taking something from that briefcase wouldn't really be theft. It would be compensation. A finder's fee in spirit, if not law. I didn't say these thoughts out loud. I let them ferment. Claire said it out loud for both of us. "We still have the computer," she said, eyes fixed on mine. "What if there's more?" There wasn't. I checked. But her words planted a new seed. Maybe the briefcase wasn't the only hidden compartment. I went into my office, shut the door, and dismantled the computer case again. Hands moving with a calm I didn't feel. I found nothing. No second cash. No extra envelope. Just dust and the hollow space where the briefcase had been. But I did find something else. A small metal tube taped inside the case frame, the kind people use for blueprints. I must have missed it the first time because it blended with the hardware. Inside the tube was a single piece of folded paper and a tiny USB drive. My heart hammered. I stared at the USB like it was radioactive. The paper had one sentence written in Harold's neat handwriting. "If Brian gets this, he wins." Under it was a password and the words, "recording/confession." Twist 4 recontextualized everything. Harold hadn't just hidden money. He'd hidden leverage, insurance, a weapon aimed at his own family. Claire whispered, "Open it." I should have handed it to the agents. I should have called our lawyer. Instead, I plugged the USB into my laptop. That was the moment I crossed from passive to active. Not with violence, not with stealing, with curiosity dressed up as justice. The USB contained audio files and scanned documents. The audio was Harold's voice, tired and precise, describing how he'd moved funds through shell companies, how he'd bribed someone at a small brokerage, how Brian had helped, until Harold realized Brian was siphoning off more than agreed. Harold talked about keeping cash and certificates out of reach until the heat dies down. He talked about his plan to burn Brian if needed. One file was labeled names. Another was labeled payoffs. There were bank account numbers. There were dates that lined up with news articles about a local firm being raided years ago. It was real. It was damning. It also made me feel sick. because I wasn't listening as an innocent bystander anymore. I was listening as someone calculating value. This was blackmail material whether I wanted to admit it or not. Claire sat on the edge of my office chair, face lit by the monitor glow, and whispered, "This could save us." "How?" I asked, though I already knew. She said, "If Brian backs off, if the estate, if we threaten him," I finished. Claire didn't look away. "He threatened us first," she said, "and we're drowning." Guilt mixed with relief is a dangerous combination. Relief says, "Here's a lever." Guilt says, "Maybe you deserve to pull it." So I did it. I called Brian, not through lawyers, direct. When he answered, he sounded amused. "Changed your mind?" I said, "I found something Harold left behind. Something about you." Silence. Then, very softly, "What did you find?" I told him enough to make it real, but not enough to give it away. I said, "Walk away. Drop your contest. Stop dragging us into this." Brian exhaled. "You don't understand what you're holding," he said. "I understand enough," I replied, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. He said, "You're making a mistake." "So are you," I said, and hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control again. It was a dirty kind of control, but it was control. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, someone broke into my car. They didn't take the stereo. They didn't take loose change. They took the glove compartment papers and, most notably, the spare key to our house that I kept hidden in a magnetic box under the frame. A key Claire had insisted we keep, just in case. That night, I found our back door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just not fully latched. Claire stood in the kitchen shaking. "They were in here," she whispered. Nothing obvious was missing. No jewelry, no TV. But my office drawer was open, and the USB was gone. I sat on the floor staring at the empty spot where I'd kept it and felt something drain out of me. The leverage, the illusion of control evaporated. Brian called the next morning from a blocked number. "You should have listened," he said, voice calm. "I'm going to the authorities," I said, but my voice sounded thin even to me. He laughed quietly. "You already lied to them," he said. "You think they'll see you as a hero now?" He wasn't wrong, and that's what made it terrifying. By the end of the week, my lawyer called and said the executor had received an anonymous package containing sensitive materials. The probate case had escalated into a broader investigation. The SEC wanted another interview. The IRS wanted records. My employer wanted clarification. Claire's credit card companies started calling more often. Leah texted asking why her tuition payment was late. Mark asked if he should cancel his senior trip deposit. Money, the thing I'd always treated as a solvable equation, had become a storm system moving through every part of our life. I didn't go to jail. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Real life is rarely that neat. But I lost things anyway. My employer accepted my resignation 2 months later, which is a polite way of saying they wanted me gone without a lawsuit. Brian eventually dropped his probate contest after the investigation intensified, but not out of kindness, out of self-preservation. The assets in the safe deposit box were seized as part of ongoing proceedings. If there's any restitution someday, it won't come to me. It will go to victims, creditors, the government, anyone with a cleaner claim than a guy who bought a computer at an estate sale. Claire and I didn't divorce immediately. We lingered in a tense truce, sharing a house like roommates who once loved each other. She apologized for the credit cards. I apologized for the USB. Neither apology fixed the fact that we'd both become people we didn't recognize. Leah took out more loans. Mark got a job after school. I picked up contract work that pays less and demands more humility than I'm comfortable with. Sometimes I look at the antique computer, still sitting in my office corner like a dumb monument. It boots now. I replaced a capacitor, cleaned the keyboard, made it work. It displays that old plain text like it's proud of itself. I used to think the strange part of the story was that money could be hidden inside something so ordinary. Now I think the strange part is how quickly I stopped being ordinary once I knew it was there. How easily responsible became resourceful. then became justified, then became cornered. The briefcase is gone. The money was never mine. The threats faded the way storms do, leaving wreckage, not closure. And late at night, when the house is quiet and the bills sit in a stack by the sink, I still catch myself thinking about that seam in the plastic case, about how my thumb found it by accident, about how a life can hinge on something as small as a hidden panel you decide to pry open.